Shavua Tov, everyone. Welcome to video number 18 in our WhatsApp series. I included this story in my third book, By the Light of the Full Moon. I wrote it based on telephone conversations and email exchanges with Rabbi Mordecai Abraham, after having previously heard a partial and somewhat tipsy version of the story from his son Dov Ber at the Shushan Purim celebration in my oldest son Yehuda's house, then in Jerusalem. I called the story 2 Points, with a subtitle, When the Holy Jerusalem Rabbi Visited the Johannesburg Basketball Rabbi. I'm telling the story tonight because we start Parshas Ki Tavo, and in my not so humble opinion, there's a hint of playing basketball in this Parsha. I'll give you a hint of the hint. It's in the first Aliyah, which we study tomorrow. Rabbi Moshe Weber, until his passing in 2000, was a central and beloved figure in Jerusalem. Every day he went, almost nearly every day, went to the Kotel to help Jews put on tefillin. He's the one that started that project. And less well known is he distributed huge amounts of tzedakah to the city's poor. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, as was known to have said about him, that Rabbi Moshe Weber is one of the holiest and kindest people in the world. And by the way, in 1988, Rav Moshe was the Sandak Sheni and guest speaker at my youngest son Yosef's Brit Milah, and Yosef paid him back in 2011 when he had his first child, exactly on the yortzeit of Rav Moshe, the 11th yortzeit of Rav Moshe, Adar Beis, the 18th of Adar Beis. After Mordecai Abraham from Toronto had become religious, he decided to go to Israel to study in yeshiva. In 1980, he spent a year in Jerusalem, and he became very close with Rabbi Weber, and spent as much time with him as he possibly could. They had an extraordinary arrangement on Shabbos mornings. Mordecai would get up at 5 a.m. in order to be at Rav Moshe's house at 5:30. For 2 hours they would study the weekly Torah reading with the commentaries of the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mezrich, and the Baal Tanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. And after that, they would walk to the Kotel. They would spend 3 or 4 hours davening the morning services there, and after that, they would walk back to Rabbi Moshe's house side by side to have the Shabbat meal. After his year culminating in rabbinical ordination, Mordecai continued his advanced studies in the USA. In 1982, he married a young woman from New York, and a year later, he accepted a job offer in Johannesburg, and they moved there. His work included working with Jewish addicts and psychiatric patients, and he was a hospital chaplain. And he also spent much time teaching Talmud and Hasidic thought. In the early and during this whole time, he kept in touch with Rabbi Weber with telephone and with mail, the old kind of mail. In the early 1990s, Rabbi Moshe Weber was diagnosed with a serious heart ailment, and Mordecai Abraham took upon himself to raise the money to fly him to Johannesburg, where he could be treated by the famous heart specialists there. The fundraising and the surgery by Professor Kinsley was a great success. Afterwards, Rabbi Moshe spent an entire month in the Abraham's house recuperating. One day, the young rabbi decided to ask Rabbi Moshe a personal question. He loved to play basketball. He would play with the Israelis there in Johannesburg. It gave him the needed exercises, and it was a lot of fun. But he didn't know if this was proper behavior for a Chabad rabbi. Rabbi Moshe was skeptical. He said, "How do you dress?" he asked him this because religious Israelis are known to take off their white shirts and tzitzis when they engage in sports. Mordecai answered him, "Just as you see me now, I don't even wear short sleeve shirts. I keep my long sleeve shirt and tzitzis on." So Rabbi Moshe said, "But what's the point? What comes out of it?" Just at that moment, no exaggeration, right at that moment, there was a knock on the door, and in walked Avi Avadia. He was an Israeli who had come many years before to South Africa, hired as a security consultant for an important person in the government. And afterwards, he decided to stay on, to move there, and to get involved in business. Now he had heard that the famous tzaddik Rabbi Moshe Weber from Jerusalem was staying at the Abraham's house, and he came to get a blessing for his new business venture. His previous one had failed terribly, and he had lost a great deal of money. Rabbi Weber, of course, gave him a blessing, and he engaged him in conversation in Hebrew. He asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm a Baal Tshuva." And Rabbi Moshe said, "Well, did somebody help you get involved?" He said, "Yes, your host, Mordecai Abraham, Rabbi Mordecai Abraham." And Rabbi Moshe said, "Well, how did you get to know him?" He said, "From playing, very innocently, from playing basketball." Divine providence strikes again. We love when that happens. But that's not the end of the story. At the time that Rabbi Mordecai had been raising money to fly in Rav Weber, so the largest educational Chabad institution in South Africa, the Torah Academy in Johannesburg, was in the midst of a vital fundraising campaign. And they resented, quote, the competition, quote, of Mordecai raising money for his project with Rabbi Weber. One of the main campaigns was a raffle. It was a raffle they were offering. The grand prize being an expensive luxury car, a Daimler Mercedes-Benz. Shortly before he had spoken with Rabbi Weber, Avi Avadia had purchased a lottery ticket, a raffle ticket. And wouldn't you know it, he won. He won the Mercedes-Benz, worth the list price $50,000. A few nights later, when Rabbi Mordecai came back from work, he found in his mailbox an envelope marked tzedakah. And in it was a check from Avi Avadia for 1,875 rand, the South African currency, which was then the equivalent of $5,000. So he understood that Avi was giving him maser, 10% of the money from the car. Apparently, he had sold the car, and in order to support Rabbi Mordecai's various worthy projects. What did he do with the money? He gave it right back to the Torah Academy. So the competition that they feared turned out to lead them to their most successful fundraising campaign ever. Because not only did they have their usual sources of income, but also they got the $5,000 from Rabbi Mordecai Abraham. And in case you were wondering, yes, Rabbi Mordecai Abraham is still playing basketball, at least as of a year and a half ago when he visited in Tzfat and we spoke. He plays with young Jews, less than half his age, and still plays and does his work with a lot of good energy.